So chapter 22, full week. It was late on a Sunday night in October 1918, and Eileen Wismer had just finished preparing for Monday's meals. So quick reminder, this Eileen person, this is the person who Holly became friends with in Regina while she lived there. Lunch kits stood open and airing on the counter, a fresh loaf of bread on the breadboard. Peas were shelled, potatoes scrubbed and ready for the pot, 2 tall jars packed with ginger snaps. The house was quiet. Eileen was almost always the last one up. She'd missed Polly Wilson this week and wondered how she was getting on in Saskatoon. Because remember, everyone, as far as everyone's aware, Polly's moved to Saskatoon with her husband. She'd hoped he'd got a nice house for her. Eileen swept the floor, tapping the dustpan in the bin on the back porch, then closed the door and turned out the kitchen light. Partway down the dimly lit hallway towards the stairs, she was startled by a knocking on the door. John Wilson stood on the veranda, peering in the oval glass of the front door. She hurried to open it before he knocked again. So it's really late and he knocks. Good evening, Mr. Wilson, she said. What was it they called him now? Inspector Wilson, was it? Good evening, Miss Wismer. I'm sorry to have been around so late, but I had business in Regina and had to leave again soon. Well, that's fine. I'm sure I was still up. She looked hopefully past him. Is Polly with you? No, his expression was grave. Now that she turned the light on, she saw how pale and edgy he looked. What, she said, what is it? Not bad news, I hope. Well, yes, it is. I'm sorry to say. We had a bad car accident, Polly and I. Oh, no. We had a bad car accident. Yes, at Saskatoon, and we had to walk 4 miles into Sutherland in the pouring rain. Polly is very ill from being so wet and cold. She got hurt pretty bad in the accident, too. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm just when she was going to get settled with the baby coming and all. I hate to hurry away, but I'm on business and I just stopped to see if there was any mail. It would cheer Polly up if she got some letters from home. Oh, yes, there is. Eileen hurried to the roll-top desk in the parlor and came back with several envelopes. A large Millennia envelope for Wilson and 3 letters from Scotland for Polly. Wilson glanced at them and turned towards the door. Oh, just a minute, Mr. Wilson. I want to send Polly some cookies. Ginger snaps are her favorite. Eileen hurried back to the kitchen and returned with a round blue tin rustling with cookies. Tell her to keep the tin. Tell her I'll be praying for her to get well soon. Please let me know how she is. I will, Miss Wismer. Oh, or Polly will. We'll just have to wait and see. Oh, Polly asked me to see if she'd left a black purse and gold brooch behind. Well, no, Eileen was surprised at the questions. Those were gifts from Mrs. Hanson. She had them with her in her bag when she left. Oh, I may have got her message wrong. And he was gone again into the night. Eileen Wismer was so rattled by Wilson's visit that she sat at the kitchen table in the dark for a long time thinking. Why on earth didn't I ask what her injuries were? Why didn't he tell me? And if she was so hurt so badly, how could she walk 4 miles into Sutherland? And didn't Jack Wilson himself look like the wreck of Hesperus? And that's odd to question about Polly's things. I doubt I'll get to sleep tonight for thinking about it. And indeed, Wilson had a week that might make anyone look like a wreck of the Hesperus. He'd been exhausted when he arrived at Blaine Lake, of course, and Jessie had taken one look at him and told him to go lie down. She had sounded none too pleased since they'd planned to marry that day if possible, had actually thought they might marry the night before. He didn't know what he'd been thinking to even consider that, and he might have done it the Saturday no matter how he felt, but they couldn't get hold of a minister. Jessie hadn't arranged for one because she said he was always changing the plans. Then on Sunday, they got dressed and gone with Jessie's mother and father to Marcelin, where there was a church service. They timed their arrival for noon just as the church let out. Jack went in to talk to the minister, a skinny, sandy-haired pup, not even dry behind the ears, who was busy packing up to get back to Saskatoon. Oh, I'm really sorry, sir, but I can't marry you. I'm not ordained yet. Jack didn't like to remember the look on Jessie's face when he told her. His sweet Jessie, looking like $1 million in her blue dress and hat and new red coat, leaning forward and smiling expectantly as he walked back to the car. When he told her, she looked as if she didn't know whether to scream or cry, but she looked none too fond of John Wilson at that moment. We'll just have to get married in Saskatoon, Jack said. I doubt very much if we'll ever get married at all, Jessie snapped. That's all I've heard about for months on end, and we're still not married. So Jessie's very unhappy with the fact that he keeps leading her on. Remember, Jessie's about 19, 20 at this point. Now, Jessie, her father said. Her mother sat staring straight ahead all the way back to Blaine Lake, just as mad as Jessie by the look of it. Jessie, we can surely find a minister in Saskatoon after church service tonight. Jack tried to take her hand, but she pulled it away, rummaging in her purse for the lace-edged handkerchief, something borrowed from her sister Kate. And how are we taking it to Saskatoon, may I ask, since you burned your car up? My car? I don't know why you had to take my car and wreck it. Calm down, Jesse, John Patterson said. And don't forget, Jack's had an accident. He didn't do it on purpose. Jimmy can drive you to Saskatoon this afternoon if you want. And that's what they did. And checked into the New Windsor Hotel after, just like any married couple, which is what they were at last. He needed a new car right away. The next morning, he went to Riddle's Carriage Works and picked one out. He took Jesse back in the afternoon to take it for a drive. He was on pins and needles the whole time. Riddle didn't know he still owed money on the burned car, and he was worried about what Riddle's men might find at the culvert when they hauled the car in. And Riddle's secretary, Jean Brown, she'd made it worse, staring at him the whole time. On Tuesday, the 1st of October, they moved out of the hotel and into the rooms he rented on 9th Street. You wouldn't be honeymooners now, would you? The landlady had teased, showing them to the second floor room. She had seen the wedding announcement in the paper that week. Jesse blushed and laughed, admitting they were. Well, all he could think of was what if someone knew Polly had seen the announcement? Jesse's loved the rooms and they moved the next day. He also made 2 trips to the burned car that week, but by then he was beginning to settle down. For Jesse, it was a bit of a lark being asked to go along with her husband and James Martin and Jim Matthews, policemen from Jack's office, as well as 2 men from the garage, Mr. Southey and Walt Cullen. The 4 of them drove out in the new car, with the men in the garage going in another car. She'd felt in a holiday mood. The day was beautiful, the fall colors glorious, and the car so lovely. Jack couldn't do enough for her. He was so touchingly grateful to be married to her. The world was suddenly full of possibilities. Jack said the way the car was going, the military police would be disbanded soon. The way the war was going, the military police would be disbanded soon, and the Mounties would be taking most of the men. They might even move to Vancouver. In the back seat, Martin and Matthews grinned at each other. Wilson spent so long looking at his pretty young wife, they were in danger of running into the ditch more than once. Well, maybe now he'd ease up on the booze, Martin thought. When they got to the culvert, all of them got out to see the car. Martin walked right through the culvert, the earth a bit spongy, and the water seepage from the slough. Southey and Kellen tried to pull the car out, but the front wheels were too bent. We'll have to come out later with the big truck and haul her in. We'll just raise the front wheels up and tow her in on the back ones. Well, Jack said, is everyone ready for dinner? My treat, kind of a wedding celebration. And they drove to a place about 5 miles away for the noon meal, with lots of lively talk and laughter among the 6 of them. Martin noticed that the boss had a couple belts out behind the cafe, but it was a special occasion after all. Jack Wilson looked more relaxed than they'd seen him in a long time. So now we have a telegram that's being sent. This is on October 15th in 1918. To William Hutchinson. Polly and I found a good house. Can you cable $100 or £100? Jack. So Jack sent a telegram to Polly's mom, asked for $100. We know he's in some financial troubles, right? Like he owes money on this new car. He just bought a new one. So a little bit of financial troubles. So we have another telegram. So from Prince Albert to Mrs. Wismore in Rose Street in Regina. Please send trunks to CN Express office. Prince Albert will write. And the letter is from Polly. So obviously Jack had written that, like Polly's dead. So he's pretending to be Polly. And we know that some of the trunks were left behind with Miss Wismer. So Eileen had kept some of the trunks, and the plan was once Polly writes, yeah, just send them on the train to us. So that's according to plan. So Eileen Wismer wrote to Polly at Blaine Lake to ask how things were and to say she was still looking for a letter. She wrote on the envelope to be opened by Mrs. Polly Wilson only. She was a bit surprised when instead of a letter, she received another telegram. Why are they getting telegrams instead of letters?
Because he can't replicate her writing.
Yeah, that's the writing part. We know Polly loved to write. She sent so many letters. You can't check someone's writing on a telegram. So this is, again, being sent from Prince Albert in October of 1918 to Eileen. I did not know you would be worried about me. Have been traveling around with Jack from place to place. When settled, will write. Polly. So he's buying time. So chapter 23, Pale Horse, Pale Rider. So this is the first time we see one of these things. We see a Bible quote in here. Behold a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death. Jack and Jesse Wilson were living at the house on 9th Street when the first cases of the Spanish influenza broke out. So we finally have the Spanish influenza. We know the war is dying down. Oops. So the war is dying down. Specifically, this has happened like end of October, right? The war is going to end on in November. So we are a couple weeks away from the war being over. So soldiers are starting to be sent home. They know what's going to happen in the war. It's like when you're surrounding your enemy that much, you know what's going to happen. So they start sending people back. They're carrying this Spanish flu with them. Jack, weakened by stress and his bout with TB, was a made-to-order victim. If he gets it, he's certainly going to die. The first cases appeared in Saskatoon on October 15th, 1918, and spread like fire. Schools and theaters promptly closed, and infected houses were placarded. Emergency hospitals were set up in Emmanuel College, and teachers in Victoria operated a food kitchen. Just like COVID. Before it was over, 250 people from Saskatoon would die. And then in the town of Rosetown, not far from Saskatoon, the undertaker ran out of the room in morgue and took over the lumberyard to store the bodies. The disease swept voraciously through Regina. In Moose Jaw, bodies piled up as terrified gravediggers refused to go to work. Winnipeg suffered 12,862 cases and 824 deaths. And out of curiosity, just kind of like show the lethality of that. So 824 out of 12,000. 863. Yeah, but so 6.4% of people died. So pretty good chance, you know, that's like a 1 in 20 chance, like a 1 in 18 chance that if you catch it, you'll die. And that's quite lucky. It's actually quite a lot more lethal than that. Like it's really hard to like overstate just how deadly this was. Like that's the best case scenario you can ever get out of that. That's just in Winnipeg. Yeah, Winnipeg 100 years ago. In Manitoba, a carpenter built coffins in his kitchen to help him keep up with the work. The priest would bring him measurements of those not yet dead. Columns of brief obituaries filled the newspapers along with killed in action announcements. The Wilsons, fearful for Jack's weak lungs, went to visit Jesse's sister Kate north of Prince Albert. There, just weeks after their wedding, Wilson fell ill with the Spanish flu. So Jack Wilson has officially gotten the Spanish flu. Keep in mind, he's always had bad lungs. He had TB. He still hasn't recovered from that. He's very thin. He's always had trouble with his lungs. And now he's just caught the Spanish flu, which is arguably the deadliest thing since the plague. The Spanish flu was a misnomer. China, France, and the United States and Britain all experienced the deadly form of the flu before it broke out in Spain of May 1918. But countries at war censored their press, and Spain, a neutral country, was the first to address it in a cable to London. A strange form of disease of epidemic character has appeared in Madrid. So basically, it's called the Spanish flu because a lot of people blamed, like, oh, it came from Spain. No, it was everywhere at this point in time. But you're in the middle of a war. You're not going to say, yeah, half our guys in those trenches, they're sick right now. You're not going to say that. So there's propaganda going about. You're censoring that information. Influenza, so named because of the medieval belief that the disease was influenced by the stars, was not new. The 19th century saw 6 major epidemics. Usually it affected the old and very young, but this new strain was different. It attacked mostly those between 20 and 40 years of age, a tragedy of catastrophic proportions to a world that had lost so many young men to war. So all of those deaths up there, that is attacking healthy people, right? That's not like this, you know, your really, really old grandma with no immune system who's getting that. That is like 7% of people who are healthy are dying. This worldwide epidemic or pandemic struck in the spring and fall of 1918 and the early months of 1919. It's believed that American soldiers brought the disease to the trenches with them. In those cold, wet trenches of Germany, France, and Belgium, chilled, undeferred, exhausted soldiers on both sides succumbed by the thousands. In October 1919, 180,000 cases were reported in the German army. That is the majority of the German army at this time. Most of the German army near the end of the war has the Spanish flu. Guns on both sides fell silent. The previous May, the British fleet, with over 10,000 soldiers sick, was unable to leave port. They had multitudes for company, among them King George V and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the 36-year-old Assistant Secretary of the American Navy. The Imperial Chancellor of Germany was also ill. It seemed likely that the Spanish flu shortened the war. So yeah, basically, like, everyone is so sick that, like, you can't fight the war. It's so the Spanish flu killed a ton of people in the war, but it's also believed to have ultimately saved lives, at least among the soldiers, because it ended the war so much quicker. When it was over, thousands headed for home, incubating the germ. Many men survived the horrors of war only to be struck down by the Spanish flu. Fatalities on troop ships were twice as that on land, which makes sense because you're in a tiny boat that's cramped. And many on their way home were buried at sea, as many were on their way to the front. The flu arrived in eastern Canada by one such troop ship. Returned men fanned out in trains across Canada, sometimes carried off before their destination. And so it spread and spread. Nothing in human history, no war and no other plague, killed so many so quickly. Worldwide, more than 20 million people died. That's in, like, I think 2 or 3 months. So again, like, it's hard to really like talk about just how deadly this thing was to the world. It killed so many people so fast. Onset was stunningly swift, and in the last stages, sometimes only hours after the first, it resembled the Black Death in that the patient's skin often took on a dark blue or black hue. Those who vomited up copious quantities of blood seemed to recover faster, though only 50 or 60 pounds lighter and with a lifetime legacy of heart and respiratory problems. It attacked Wilson first, Jesse soon after. Somehow they made their way to the Pattersons of Blaine Lake, who, if the newspaper accounts were right, were not likely to catch it. Once again, his family depended on the Patterson family, who could be forgiven if they secretly wished they'd never laid eyes on him. Dangerous age 26 to 30 headlined the Regina Leader. Not so in the Patterson house. In an attempt to look after Jesse and Jack, Allison and John immediately came down with themselves and were seriously ill themselves. Remember, we have 2 Johns. Jesse's sister's husband is also named John. Most people quietly did what they could for their stricken neighbors. There was often a terrible dilemma whether to help sick neighbors at the risk of infecting your own family. The flu was capricious, to say at the least, sometimes killing an entire family or randomly choosing 1 or 2. The Swiss called it the Quequot for its fickle nature and its propensity to pass its favorites around so quickly. In the Patterson household, all survived and the future looked bright. Peace was just over the horizon. When the armistice was signed on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, celebrations erupted, bonfires burned in Trafalgar Square, and Saskatchewan farmers lit up the sky with burning straw stacks. Hoarded bottles suddenly appeared and the Kaiser Wilhelm crackled in effigy. And many of those who were sick felt their hearts lighten. The war was over. The flu, or the worst of it, had passed. For many, it was a joyful time. For others, one of acute sadness. As Catherine Ann Porter wrote at the end of her story, "Pale horse, pale rider." No more war, no more plague, only the day's silence that follows the ceasing of heavy guns, noiseless hours, and with the shades drawn, empty streets, the dead cold light of tomorrow, now there will be time for everything. So that's chapter 23. And so remember, we had that quote at the very start, right? "Behold a pale horse, and his name that sat there was death." This is just kind of like a reference to the fact that all this chapter is talking about is that like millions, tens of millions of people have died in World War I and with the flu. I'm just guessing, I'm going off memory, but I think between the 2 of them, we're looking at something like 80 million people have died, which is substantial, especially with the world population at the time.
Was there like a Spanish flu kind of too as well?
There wasn't a Spanish flu there, but like there was still lots of sickness that went around, but nothing with that degree. No, like the closest thing we've kind of seen to the Spanish flu would actually probably be COVID. COVID's just a lot less deadlier.
Yeah, I'm not sure how deadly this one was. For consumption.
Like consumption?
Yeah, that is that active lungs or like wasn't it lungs?
Oh, I have no idea. I'm not too sure, actually. I believe it. I mean, I'm pretty sure, like, bacterial warfare has been used or used for hundreds of years, thousands of years. So we'll go into chapter 24. I have not been good in my time. Jack Wilson would say later that during this period, shortly after his marriage to Jessie and his bout with the flu, his mind was all to pieces. In a little more than a year, he'd fallen madly in love, suffered a serious case of TB, lost his job, and his wife had arrived out of the blue. Then he'd started an important new job, committed a murder, got married again, nearly died of the Spanish flu, and moved 4 times. So he has been busy this last year. And keep in mind, for him to go to like Saskatoon to Blaine Lake or Saskatoon to Regina, he's not cruising at the speeds we're going. Their cars top out at 20 kilometers an hour. So for him to go to Regina, Saskatoon all the time, that is 9 hours each way. The following letter from a man he worked with in Saskatoon, with its reminder, now don't forget this, seemed to substantiate his claim. It also supports a later report that he was playing fast and loose with the Military Service Act fines he's collected. So this is November 1918, a letter sent to Jack. Your Chief Reed came after me today in Regina in regard to the trip we had in Birch Hills, and he showed me the case of Alf Schmitz. Now I gave him a list of all the men who were fined and the costs. All and every case I made the cost $350. Now don't forget this, as they're still looking for some loophole. Alf Schmidt's costs were somewhere about $45 or $50, but don't forget the costs were only $350 in all cases. Now I don't know what to say to you, only I still have possession of your rifle and could not see anyone who I could trust to give it you on my way through. I hope you and the missus are in the enjoyment of good health as I am present. So now bye-bye. So he's getting called out. You're taking bribes. You're taking bribes from these people. Or he's lying and saying your fine's this much and he's pocketing the rest. The extra money Wilson had pocketed more than likely helped him finance his double life, including the purchase of the car for Jessie. In Scotland, Polly's family were very concerned. Her parents and her sister Nellie tried to hide it from the children, but they conferred often with other family members by letter and on visits. The silence from across the ocean became louder by the day. Helen Hutchinson reread Polly's last letter, dated September 15th. Over 2 whole months now, Nellie, and Polly knows how the children love Christmas. It is strange, Mother, I can't deny it. And Lizzie still not received the letter Polly said she'd write as soon as she got settled in Saskatoon. Now, let's not borrow trouble. William Hutchinson didn't believe in borrowing anything. We'll hear something soon. And they did, or at least Elizabeth's husband, Archie, did. So Polly's family in Scotland's really concerned right now, right? Because we know that Polly loves to write. She loves to write, and she's not written now in 2 months. So in December of 1918, dear Archie, so this is a letter being sent to Elizabeth's husband. Elizabeth is Polly's sister. I'm writing this to tell you about what awful trouble Polly and I have had since the Spanish influenza broke out. I was transferred to Saskatoon about the middle of October to take charge of the northern half of the province, and the salary was increased to $200 per month and $6 per day expenses. Polly and I was so pleased about it. Influenza broke out at the same time, and owing to Polly's conditions and so many deaths amongst women in that state, we were afraid. A doctor advised me to take her away out in the country up north to try and evade the flu. We went to my police car and I got laid up and I got up too soon. Then took a relapse and took pneumonia. Before getting delirious, I told the doctor to spare no expense with Polly. So he got 2 trained nurses for day and night duty. We were both very ill. So in his letter, he's saying we were both really sick, but you know what? Spare no expenses. Make sure Polly's taken care of. We're going to hire nurses, all this. I got out a week ago for the first time as one of the nurses wanted to quit. I had to go all the way to Regina to get another one. They are so hard to get. Then I got sick on the way home and was laid up again until yesterday. Neither of us was expected to live, but although Polly is very weak, the doctor says there's no danger now as she is only careful and she has not to get up for at least 2 weeks yet. For myself, I'm a wreck now. I weigh 132 pounds and he's very tall, mind you, and my lung isn't very bad again. I don't know what it is to get a good sleep. As soon as I go to bed, I start coughing. I have seen a lung specialist and he told me, frankly, I will not live many months. Now, Archie, as soon as Polly is strong enough, I will tell her and we will come home. I want to see the children before the end. So Jack is saying, I'm going to die soon. I really want to come home and see the children. It is hard, Archie. I have not been good in my day. I've not been good in my day. And then I was making such good money that soon we would have been well fixed. I had a good job and a big responsibility, but I could handle it. It is very hard. My pay is still going on yet, but likely will be stopped soon unless I get strong enough to work until Polly is well enough. You can tell father and mother, Archie, that I spared no expense on Polly since she got laid up. I am paying one nurse $30 and the other $25 per week, and I've already paid the doctor $300. But Archie, I had to save Polly. I knew if I took the flu that the old lung trouble would come back and likely finish me. I got Jim's letter and meant to reply to it, but got laid up a few days after I received it. Polly did not lose the baby, and the doctor says everything will be all right, provided she is careful. I will bring her home as soon as she is strong enough. And Archie, I'm going to leave it to you to pay her just what you think the firm owes me, but we can settle all that when we come home. Now I'm going to close now as my arm is getting shaky writing. The deaths from the flu here have been very high. Up in the north, they are finding homesteaders dead in their shacks everywhere. I will write father and mother in a few days. Your loving brother, John. So big letter here where he's talking about he sent so much expense. Him and Polly are both supposed to die, but they lived. At this point, he probably should have just said Polly died from the flu. Pretty easy out, right? That's a pretty easy out, but he didn't. Sorry? It would be believable, absolutely. Like they're trying to get rid of these bodies. Like that's would have been a really good opportunity for him. Archie's Craig bundled up in warm clothes, wheeled out his bicycle, and rode through the blustery cold rain, the 23 miles to Slamanan to break the awful news to Polly's parents. In Regina, Miss Wisman received a letter written the same day. Dear Madam, I have been asked by Polly to write and tell you our troubles for the past 10 weeks. When I left you the last time, I came back to Saskatoon the same night and felt sick. I went to the doctor and he advised me to get out of the country and to try and keep away from the influenza owing to the condition of my lungs. Telling him about Miss Wilson and her condition and what we expected early in the year, he said she must try to keep away from the flu if possible. We started out in the country and I got laid up with the flu in a few days. Then took pneumonia, then Polly took ill. I got out for the first time a week ago yesterday. Polly is very ill, but is now out of danger. It was very hard that we took ill in the country, but maybe it was for the best. As soon as Polly took ill, the doctor advised me to get a trained nurse for her, as he was afraid that it would be hard on her owing to her condition. She's pregnant. We got 2 nurses for her, one for the night duty, and thanks to the doctor, she's now out of danger, but so weak that they only allow me to go in for a short time daily. I cabled home a few days ago for her and got a reply that none of them at home are sick. As for myself, I was down at the Fort Qu'Appelle Sanatorium on Thursday being examined, and the doctor says my lungs is so bad now, he does not think I will live till the spring. I weigh 132 pounds and can only walk about 3 blocks without a rest. As soon as Polly gets well enough to move, I'm going to bring her to Regina for a little while. Then I shall have to tell her what the doctor says about me, and we shall go home if I am strong enough, as I want to see the children. It's very hard. I have not been very good in my time, but I am thankful I have been able to spare no expense in Polly's illness so that she will be able to look after the children. I came home today from Prince Albert in connection with my work. I want to try and hold my job for a little while as the wages are good and Polly will need all the money I can get before her I can get for her before I get laid up again. I don't know what it is to get a good sleep. I cough all night long. I'm going back to Polly tonight again. I want to ask a favor from you, Miss Wismore. Will you try and give Polly a room and look after her as soon as she's well enough to stand for the trip? For myself, I will not ask you to take me as consumption is so infectious. But as soon as she is strong enough, she will come down beside you until she is strong enough to make the trip home. It is very hard and all this trouble coming on us, but we are not so bad as some. There has been so many deaths of this influenza that we ought to be thankful. P.S. In your reply, please address it to box 287 Sutherland, as I'm staying with our friends there while I am in Saskatoon, and I shall have to come down next week again. So he sent 2 letters here. So first off, you're going to want to write a sticky note. Anytime you see a letter, I recommend write a sticky note. They're always going to contain a couple nuggets of lies in there. Now, one thing though is we've seen a couple things that he says in both of these letters. One of the things he says in both these letters is I hired 2 nurses and I hired a doctor to take care of Polly. This is probably false because Polly's dead. Another thing he says is I'm 132 pounds That one's probably true. We've seen pictures of him. He says that the doctors tell him that he doesn't have much long to live because his lungs are so bad. Do we think that one's true or that one's false? That one's probably true. We'll find out. But that, you know, that logically that seems to make sense. Like, yeah, you had bad lungs before you got the Spanish flu. And we know that the Spanish flu has complications for survivors. So yeah, maybe. And he's also telling her that any future letters you send, I want you to send them to this address in Saskatoon. Why do we think the reason he's doing that? Anytime you write to Polly, please send it to this address. Probably because he doesn't want to get caught again from a letter being left out, right? Any letters that are being sent to Polly, he's going to have them go to one certain mailbox that only he knows about, that only he's going to be able to pick up and read. Jesse can't see this stuff, right? So he can't actually get this to where he lives. He has to get this to a second address. That same night, after the house was quiet, Eileen Wismer brought writing paper, pen, and ink into the warm kitchen. It would be difficult, but she had to answer Jack Wilson's letter. This awful flu, that poor man. She didn't like him, but he seemed to be sorry now. What did he say? That he had not been good in his day? At least he admitted it, and he had to pity a man in his condition, no matter what you felt about him personally, and do what you could to ease his burden. She would talk to him of religious matters. Everyone had to face up to it in the end. Eileen dipped the pen and began to write. The Canadian National Railway, CNR, express office in Prince Albert was crowded, as always, with trunks, boxes, and parcels of every description. And Ned Story had to lean over two trunks for the umpteenth time to reach something on a higher shelf, as if this job wasn't hard enough on the back without people using it as a storage depot. Haven't we heard anything about these two trunks from Regina? He called testily to someone in the adjournment office. No, his assistant came to the door. Do you want me to write a letter to that Miss Wismer? Yes, damn it. I've just tripped over the blasted things for the 47th time. Ask her if we can send them back there or what. All right, Mr. Story, I'll do it after the next train. Damn funny, they said. They've been here 2 months, just about. Tell her to send us Mrs. Wilson's address. Maybe there's some mix-up. She doesn't know they're here. Oop. Yes, sir, I'll do that. And he bounded off at the urgent clicking of the telegraph. Ned Stories rolled his eyes behind his assistant's back. Eager young pup, he hated being called sir. There was no reply from Miss Wismer, but about a month later, a postcard arrived from Mrs. Wilson herself. Sick with the flu in the Sutherland Hospital. Please hold trunks till I can call for them. Please advise me of box 287 Sutherland as to the charges against them, Mrs. Polly Wilson. A postal notice was sent to Miss Wilson at that address, notifying her of the charges against the shipments, and the postcard was pinned to the on-hand card in the office. Eventually, the trucks were moved into the back of the storage shed since it looked as if Mrs. Wilson, poor soul, had not survived the flu. Shortly after Ned Story moved to Edmonton as the express agent for the Great Northern Railway, it would be another year before anyone showed the slightest interest in Polly Wilson's trunks. So that's some foreshadowing there. But basically, remember those trunks that they packed up way back in the story? He had Eileen send them on the railway to Saskatoon. No one went to pick them up because, of course, Polly's dead. And so they sat there forever. When the first payment for Mr. Wilson's new car was conspicuous by his absence, Mr. Riddle was none too pleased. He'd allowed Wilson $200 for the old burned car, but when he saw it, he knew he'd been cheated. He was lucky to get a few spare parts from it. Well, I've learned my lesson. A policeman's uniform doesn't guarantee anything, he told his friends. Riddle was just hurrying back to the garage after his morning tea one frigid December day when he saw John Wilson across the street. Wilson. Wilson stopped and Riddle hurried over. Could I talk to you a minute, please? You know your car payment didn't come through. Now he was closer. Riddle saw a Wilson that looked pale and thin as a rake. Yes, I know. I was coming to see you about it. I've been very ill with the flu, and now I've got TB. Riddle stepped back a bit. I just came back from the sanatorium in Quebec, and I have to go back for a year. So now he's saying he has TB again, right? We know that was a bold-faced lie. Oh, is that so? Why didn't he believe the man? For one thing, he didn't think people with TB were allowed to come and go from the sanatorium as if it was a hotel and go roaming around the country giving it to other people. If they could, no wonder there was so much of it around. I'm expecting some money from the old country any day now, and we'll make sure you get paid, Wilson said. Riddell phoned the doctor at the Fort Qu'Appelle Sanitarium and was told they'd never heard of John Wilson. So we see a bold-faced lie here. Around Christmas time, we saw Wilson again. And asked about the money. I was just going to Cable Scotland for the money to pay you. Good, I'll go with you right now. And he did, standing at Wilson's elbow while he sent the cable. That's good then. I'll see you in a day or two, Wilson. As soon as Riddell turned the corner, Jack went back and canceled the cable. So he gets caught. He knows he's being lied. It's kind of like a mob, right? Oh, you're going to do this? Cool. I'll come with you right now. We'll go do it together. We'll go take money out of the bank together. And he immediately cancels that cable because it takes time to send it. It's not like an email, right? They have to do some stuff with it. The car dealer had yet to learn that the burned car he purchased for $200 had a $300 lien against it in favor of J.A. Erskine, the gray Dort agent in Regina. Eventually, Riddle would repossess the new car in rotten condition and judge himself out about $600 from his dealings with Inspector Wilson. Wilson was still drinking heavily. In the early afternoon, on a trip to Blaine Lake with Jesse, they bumped into Sergeant Drysdale, whom Wilson knew from the Prince Albert Mounted Police detachment. So this is the guy who was with Wilson when Polly first called the office. I want you to meet my wife, Jessie. We got married last fall. Sergeant Drysdale was on his way to Prince Albert and sat together till the Wilsons got off at Blaine Lake. I'll soon be back in the service myself, Jack said. Drysdale could smell the liquor on him. Wilson got up and lurched off to the bathroom, laughing and trying to pretend the movement of the train had thrown him off balance. Jesse looked embarrassed. So the man's still drinking really heavily. What I'm just going to do is I'm actually just going to do a really quick plot summary just for those chapters. Here, so we're just going to do a really quick one for 22 to 24. We'll keep reading. So we'll just get you to go to page 19 of your booklet here. Red. So a lot has happened in these chapters. That's on page 19 of your booklet. All right. So in the very, very start, we open up in in Eileen's point of view, right? In Regina, that person that lived with them, lived with Polly for a little bit. And so she gets a knock on her door, and we have John Wilson has showed up. And what does John say? John says that Polly gets injured in a car accident to Eileen Wismer. Right? She's injured in this car accident. She's lucky to be alive. We walked 4 miles. She has really bad injuries. Also around this time, we see the flu that ends up coming. And so we see that John says, this is in a letter. John says Polly got sick with the flu to her family in Scotland. Right? And it's where like I spared no expense, hired 2 nurses, hired a doctor. I got it too. I'm going to die next spring, stuff like that. We also see, this actually probably should have came earlier. Jesse and Jack get married in the end of September 1918. That probably should have been before the flu part, but too little too late. The trunks get sent to finally we get those trunks. Get sent to the CN office. CRN office, sorry. Right, those are those trunks that Polly had packed up. Eileen had sent them on the train for her. Of course, Polly didn't come pick them up because Polly is dead. So they get sent to the office, they're put in storage, and they write it off that, oh, well, she probably died. She probably died from the flu. So the Spanish flu, we're just gonna say it infects everyone, right? Like it's spreading like wildfire. We know Jack and Jesse got it. And at the same time, World War I ends. So World War I ends, and what ends up happening, Jack gets a letter from one of his coworkers. And in that letter, it's accusing Jack of he's taking money, right? His job is to go to army deserters and collect their fines. That fine is $350. He's collecting $50. So he's pocketing a lot of money. So World War I ends, and basically John gets caught stealing money from work again. And the story ends, sorry, these chapters end here with this car loan, right? So we learn that John owes money for the burned car and the new one. And so how is he getting this money? He's requesting money from the quote unquote old country, right? From people he knows in Scotland, from his family, from Polly's family. Oh, what the? Give it a little bit here. Okay. So let's get up and running here. So we might end off at chapter 27. We'll see how much time we got. So chapter 25, wait in. Another hog manny, that's New Year's. A year since Polly's announcement that she was going to look for Jack, the family gathered and compared notes, even though there was no new notes to compare. It was now more than 3 months since Polly had written, and they had grown anxious by the day. I wrote and sent to 3 newspapers in September and told Polly that Lizzie was wondering if they'd received the £100, Helen said. Polly wrote right back and said she'd write to Lizzie in a few days as soon as she got settled in Saskatoon. And I never heard a word, Elizabeth said. Though they all knew it, they had gone over it and over it. They kept their voices low. The children were first in bed. They hadn't even asked to stay up for the first foot. Well, don't forget, there was that letter from Jack in December about the flu and how much money he'd spent on the doctors and nurses, with a trace of sarcasm. I know, Helen Hutchinson said, but that was from Jack and so much later. Why wouldn't Polly write a word to us after she moved to Saskatoon before she fell ill? William Hutchinson turned from putting more coal in the fire. Well, don't forget, Mother, it seems long, but it's only a bit over 3 months. There'll be extra mail with the war ending and Christmas and all. And before that, she was down with the flu. Maybe after all that's happened, she'd be embarrassed to say if she and Jack aren't getting on. But Polly's mother would not be comforted. They're trying to find excuses, like, justifications, right? Some of this stuff seems to make some sense logically. She shook her head, her lips tight. That would never stop Polly writing, especially to the children, even just a postcard. Then finally, 12 days later, news arrived in the form of a cablegram. Out today for the first time, Jack again sick, both coming home next month, Polly said. So they're both going to come home February of 1919. Polly never sent us that, said her mother, and no one could convince her otherwise. Sorry, if Helen Hutchinson's skepticism rubbed off on the rest of the family, the second table, addressed to Archie, dispelled it completely. Both leaving for home next week via the Panama Canal. Can you send £100, John? So he's asking for more money, right? Yep. We need more money. We're trying to come home. No one in the world would be so cruel as to send such a message to an anxious family if it wasn't so, especially to the children. That was unimaginable. The preparations for the glad reunion begun. The cooking and the bacon, the cleaning and polishing of Polly and Jack's house, the sewing of new clothes for the young ones to go meet their parents, presents lovingly made by the bairns, and the children got more excited with each passing day, and they waited and they waited. So that's quite a cruel thing, right? Like saying, yeah, we're going to come home now, when like we know that isn't happening. We know Polly's dead. Foreseeing a period of unrest after the war in December of 1918. Remember, the prologue opened up in December 1918, right? So now we're going back to that time where that prologue has started. The Canadian government issued an order that the Royal Northwest Mounted Police would be recruited from 303 men to a strength of 1,200. They also recalled the detachments serving in France and Serbia. With the war over, the need to enforce the Military Service Act was over, and the civil section of the military police was disbanded. Men serving in that force were, for the most part, absorbed into the Royal Northwest Mounted Police. Wilson got his wish to be back in the Mounties. On January 6th, when he was re-engaged, he gave his next of kin as Mary Polly Wilson in 217 9th Street, Saskatoon. He spent 3 weeks at Regina's headquarters, then his posting came through. On January 21st, Jack and Jesse left for Blairmore, Alberta in the Crow's Nest Pass. They left the trunk and some boxes, including Wilson's shotgun, in a shed at Con Reed's place. In late February, Jack Wilson was granted a request to be transferred to Vancouver. There were now 1,000 miles at a mountain range between him and that shallow grave near Waldheim. So he's trying to get away. Whenever Jack's in trouble, what does he do? He runs away. One cold January day, Mrs. Lane, the Hutchinsons' old friend from the Slamanan, and Aline Wismer were conferring over tea in the Wismer's parlor. A fire crackled in the hearth and the good smell of roasted chicken wafted out from the kitchen. I was so hoping you'd have some good news to take back to Scotland. I wish I had some for you, but I haven't had a word from her in her own hand, only that telegram, and I know she'd have written it if she was all right. You don't think it's just that things aren't, they both knew about the other woman. No, she'd have let me know when the baby was born. I know she would. She counted on her fingers. You see, that baby would be here by now. It was her third, so it wouldn't be late, not likely. So yeah, which makes sense. When she died, she was 6 months pregnant. It has been a little bit over 3 months now since she has died. So that third child should be here now. Unless she lost the baby because of that car accident. If there was a car accident, policeman or no policeman, I don't trust Jack Wilson. I never did. Oh dear, I just don't know what to think. Do you? But something is seriously wrong. And with him in the police force, he can say what he wants and people will believe him. They pause for a moment as if they both consider what they might really be saying. And Polly's such a sweet girl. She always was. Yes, as nice as they come. I felt sorry for you having to talk to her folks in Scotland, Mrs. Lane. Mrs. Lane sighed and shook her head. Yes, indeed. So now we're moving over to Scotland. What? Helen Hutchinson cried, then covered her mouth with her hand. She did not want to waken father. That's what he told me on the phone. After I went to see Miss Wismer, I phoned the police headquarters in Regina, and Jack himself answered the phone. And he said Polly was in an accident. We never heard that. Was she hurt badly? He said she was nearly killed, but was recovered now. Nearly killed. He told us she only had a bad case of the flu. Helen Hutchinson looked as if she might faint. Mrs. Lane quickly got her a glass of water, which she drank, spilling a bit on her afternoon dress. It was almost dark in the parlor. A cold, steady rain streamed down the windows. So that lady that was just talking to Eileen, that person who lived in Regina, she went on a boat. She went back to Scotland. So this is them talking face to face in Scotland. He told me she had a trifling case of the flu, but that was a bad accident. I just don't understand it. Something is far wrong. I know it. Though they all keep saying I mustn't think that way. And William's heart attack, there was nothing in the world but worrying himself over one poor girl. Helen herself looked frail. She'd aged a great deal since her friends last saw her. I'm so sorry. I thought maybe it was good news about her being recovered from the accident. Oh no, you mustn't feel bad, Mrs. Lade. We appreciate all you've done. We've tried everything to get news, but it's also a way, isn't it? If only she'd never gone. That's all I think of. And so chapter 26. Jack and Jesse delighted in Vancouver and spent many hours taking in the sights of the burgeoning city on the west coast. Soon Jack's old pal Conrad Reed, who had also joined the force, would be there. Jack had pulled some strings to get Con posted to Vancouver. Nell, Con's wife, would be company for Jesse too. Jack was doing good work now and had 3 stripes on his sleeve. He had, not surprisingly, displayed a flair for undercover assignments. What's more, the mild coastal climate, more like the old country, agreed with him, and he was gaining weight. Life was good once again, if he didn't think too much. But there was always reminders, as in Con's last letter. By the way, I have your gun. I did not take it to a gunsmith, but cleaned it myself. In fact, I'm still at it. It was in pretty bad shape, but it's coming around now. I got back to Saskatoon the morning after you left, and I was mad that I had missed you. Saskatoon is about the same. We had 2 weeks of pretty cold weather, but now the streets are almost cleared of snow and the autos are appearing in force. That cold Saskatchewan world and everything connected with it was thankfully far away. They hadn't seen snow since they left, and Jesse'd been like a wide-eyed child on the trip out. He'd spent an awful lot of money, wanted to give her the best of everything, and he didn't regret it. So he already had debt problems. He already wasn't working a lot because he was sick, and now he's spending more money. And to a small town prairie girl like Jessie, Vancouver was astonishing. The heights of elegance with its Victorian towers, turrets and gingerbread work, its thick lawns and monkey puzzle trees, men in bowler hats and Chinese houseboys jostled elbows on the streets. Women in handsome driving habits and traps trotted through breads around Stanley Park, and weekend holidays crowded a huge pier and beach at English Bay. Traffic drove on the left side of the streets in the British style. Jesse was too timid to drive. New buildings were springing up all over, and everywhere was the exhilarating smell of the ocean and excited cries of skulls. It was a far cry from Blaine Lake. But all was not idyllic. Jack was doing undercover work now. He was away a lot and still drinking too much, often in the line of duty, he said, with suspects, mostly dock workers, but still. And his moods were unpredictable when he drank, sometimes frighteningly black. She had hid his service revolver more than once when he threatened to kill himself. He hadn't done that lately, but he still woke up pale and sweating from terrible nightmares. It was all very frustrating, and Jessie missed her family, especially her mother. Jack still hadn't produced the divorce papers Jessie so needed to see. Both his sisters were dead, he had told her. but his brother Alex must be home again. Why couldn't he send the papers? Or Jack's lawyer, or the Reverend Haxworthy, was that his name? Who was so close to the Wilson family. Surely there was someone. She didn't understand it, but couldn't help but wonder sometimes if she was legally married. On April 15th, the Reeds arrived and Conrad Reed handed Jack Wilson his shotgun. So he still has not produced those divorce papers because he never got divorced. The day before, in Wilson's home village in Scotland, Elizabeth Craig sat down to write a letter. So it's being sent to Mr. Routledge, the superintendent of the Royal Northwest Mounted Police in Prince Albert. Owing to your last kindness, I again take the liberty of making use of the same. As you know, my sister came out to Canada to her husband, Mr. John Wilson. As it was in your office, she found him in April of last year, 1918. We had letters from her every mail up till the end of September when Mr. Wilson got promotion under Dominion Military Police and was sent to Saskatoon. Since going there, we have never received a letter from my sister. Wilson wrote my husband on the 14th of December saying he had been dangerously ill with the flu and that my sister was expected to get better but was not out of danger, but that had not been many months to live. And he had not many months to live, and that as soon as his wife was able to travel, he would bring her home to father and mother as he wanted to see his children before the end. So he does not have many months to live thing. So do you remember who told him that? That was the doctor in the sanitarium. But eventually, that car dealership guy, he had called the sanitarium. We don't know who Jack or John Wilson is. So that's a lie. So we did eventually discover that that's a lie he's spreading about right now. For whatever reason, we don't know. But he's spreading out saying that, yeah, I'm going to be dead next spring. Mr. Rutledge, you can understand how we all feel receiving this letter, and my husband went home to Slamanan to break the awful news to my poor father and mother. About the middle of January, father received a cable saying they were both much better and were sailing for Scotland the following month in February. The next week, my husband received a cable saying he, Wilson, and Polly were sailing next week and that my husband cable £100, and that was the second £100. Since then, we have received no news of them, and naturally we looked and waited till we began to worry very much about them both. Then my father had a bad heart attack, and I went to see him and found out that he and my mother were killing themselves with worry about their girl. So when I left, I promised to get news from them soon. My husband met me at the trap at station, and when I told him how father and mother were worrying, he cabled to Wilson to see if they were well and telling them of father's illness. That was a fortnight past and no answer has yet been received. My husband went on Saturday to see father and mother, and Mrs. Lane had come from Regina to inform us that while my sister had the flu, it was only trifling and that she'd nearly been killed in a motor accident. So like what's almost killed her? Is it the flu? Is it the motor accident? Different people have different stories. Now, sir, can you understand any man saying his wife was dangerously ill with the flu when it was an accident? This raw information combined with no answer to our cable and knowing the treatment Wilson meted out to my sister from the time he entered the M police has shattered all confidence we ever had in him and has greatly increased my father and mother's anxiety for their daughter. They entreated my husband to ask me to write to the gentleman who had been so kind in making inquiries for my sister's husband, so he promised I would make sure to do so. Would you be so kind, Mr. Rutledge, to inquire or cause inquiries to be made in Saskatoon for my sister? And could you get the information from another source other than Mr. Wilson, as we have no faith now in anything he told us about my sister? He was always a plausible liar. My husband bids me say he will only be too pleased to pay any expense caused in finding out my sister. We never had their Saskatoon address, but he is in Saskatoon with Dominion Police. We would give anything to have definitive news of her. The uncertainty is keeping my father from recovering, and indeed my hubby says it is killing him. Oh, sir, would you do your best to please relieve an old man and women's anxieties about their child? My father has got in his head that my sister is dead, perhaps foul play, and you know once old people get a notion in their mind, it is not easy to remove it. Will you please write by return or as soon as you get any news for us? Don't rely on what Wilson says, as we anxiously await your reply. Thanking you for your past trouble and kindness for us in anticipation of another to us. I remain Elizabeth Craig. When Elizabeth refers to Roach's past kindness, she is referring to letters he wrote in reply to queries about Wilson's whereabouts before Polly came over. This outstanding police officer would start the ball rolling in the investigation into Polly's disappearance. Okay, so Elizabeth, which is Polly's sister, is sending that letter in to the police to basically like figure out what's going on here. Like, we just keep getting strung along, we keep sending money, we don't hear anything from her. Like, the stories aren't matching up. What's going on? So in chapter 27, spring. This is when Wilson's supposed to be dead, right? Spring has come to the prairies. The snow is melted, the sloughs full, the duns and browns and ochres of early spring veil in a soft haze of green. By the culvert near Waldheim, robins swoop from tree to tree with twigs. Derisive crows trade insults between fence posts. A meadow lark at the edge of the field pauses in its labors to throw back its head and flings a joyous song over and over in the soft blue sky. Ducks skim the ponds, bees investigate the first flowers, and under the greening grasses and ground cover, all manner of insects go about their industrious insect lives. Mauve and purple crocuses, their petals cupped in downy silver gray sepals, have sprouted overnight. Sanely and in clumps, they bask among the sea green sage and prairie grass. Plain, sturdy, honest little flowers, a lot like Polly Wilson, who knows nothing of the spring, nor ever will of another. So again, we don't see a lot of landscape stuff in this, but this whole thing here, this whole chapter is only about the landscape. So this is one of those rare occurrences that we're seeing here. And this one's really just talking about, we know that spring is about like new opportunities and stuff like that. Specifically, it's a new opportunity. Like Jack and Jesse, they have their new opportunity, their new chance at life now. They've moved completely away. He has a new job. Things seem like they're going up for him. But also, we're starting to see this investigation starting to happen about Polly. So it's kind of two-faced in this way. One second, I'm just trying to think here. Chapter 30. Do we want to keep going? What page are you guys on right now? Oh, in the actual book. Sorry? 114. I just want to see if we want to keep going or not. Yeah, we're gonna keep going. Yeah, we'll do one more chapter here, but we'll quickly do another plot summary of this. Ooh. So we'll do another plot summary. So basically, this opens up back in the old country. We know that Polly's family has not heard from her in 3 months. We know that, just based off simple math, she would have had the baby by now. And so what ends up happening is we know that Jack requests, I'm going to put the dollar sign, but 200 pounds in 2 letters. He asked for 100 pounds twice. Specifically because he's saying that Jack and Polly are coming home to Scotland next week. And this is January of 1919. Right? So Jack has sent a letter saying, yeah, Polly and I are coming home. And everyone gets really excited here, right? And we see one really striking quote. I like including this quote. No one in the world would be so cruel as to send such a message to an anxious family if it wasn't so. Oh. Right, so this is, now they have no doubts. Okay, they're coming home. Because who would lie like this, right? No one would make up a lie like this. It's like, yeah, we're on our way. But what we know has actually happened is that Jack and Jesse moved to Vancouver and starts undercover work for the Mounties. That's what's actually happened in this case.
No one in the world would be, what did it say, would be?
Oh, would be. No one in the world would be so cruel.
What's? Oh, that's gonna cover what further up.
Oh, why did that?
Oh,
What's going on here? For the. There we go. All right, so I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna read 3 more chapters here. One thing I will say, you're gonna notice is this thing down here, we're skipping it. This is just gonna be where you're gonna write like a fake letter, like posing as one of these characters, but we're just gonna skip this. At this point, we have a pretty good understanding of like the psychology of these characters and stuff, and like how they like writing. All right, so we're gonna read chapters 28 to 31. Oh, I'm missing some notes. All right. Hold back a sneeze, 1 second. It's just right there, whatever. All right, chapter 28, something fishy. So on May 10th, this is 1919. So remember, at this point, Jack should be dead, according to his fictional doctor, right? So this is a lie. Assistant Commissioner Rutledge wrote a letter that would open the investigation of Polly Wilson's disappearance. And in a letter to Superintendent Fitzpatrick Joseph Horrigan at the Vancouver Detachment, he asked Horrigan to ascertain from regimental number 6020, which is Wilson's number, the present whereabouts and an address of his wife. Rutledge had received inquiries from the old country and would be happy to have this information without delay. F.J. Horrigan promptly replied that number 620's wife was living with him in Vancouver. On May 16th, Rutledge wrote to Polly's sister, Miss Elizabeth Craigs, in Scotland. Dear Madam, I am in receipt of your letter on the 14th ultimo, making inquiries as to the whereabouts of the wife of Corporal John Wilson with the Royal Northwest Mounted Police. And in reply, I would say that Mrs. Wilson is at present living with her husband. If you wish to communicate with her, I would advise sending your letter under cover, addressed to Superintendent F.J. Horrigan, the Royal Northwest Mounted Police, in Vancouver. So he's saying John Wilson has his wife and his wife is living with him. Now we know that that's Jesse, but they don't know. Elizabeth was euphoric at last after 7.5 months. News of Polly from a reliable source. 7.5 months. They hadn't heard of Polly, who loves writing. She was in Vancouver, which must mean that she had recovered from the flu or the accident or both. It meant she was alive anyways. What wonderful news to send home to her parents. Archie had set off again for Slamanan on his bicycle to tell the Hutchinsons, but they had received news with skepticism and did not write themselves. Elizabeth wrote a long, joyous letter to Polly, enclosing it in a letter to Superintendent Horrigan. Because she could not get rid of a doubt herself, she had included a picture of Polly in her letter to Horrigan. So she replies to this guy and she sends a picture of Polly as well. 1 second. She didn't have a recent picture, so she sent the photo she'd taken with the children. The picture of Polly, so sober except for the tiny smile pulling out the corner of her mouth, made Elizabeth smile. And we can see this picture. This picture is in the middle of your book there, like those pictures that we looked at right before book 2 started. Those are there. That picture of her with the 2 kids, that's the photo that she's sending here. Now they would hear from Polly with an explanation for her long silence. There had to be a reason. In a force known for men dedicated to their work, Fitzpatrick Joseph Horrigan was known as an exceptionally hard worker. In 1918, when he asked for 2 months leave to visit family in Ontario, he noted in a letter to Commissioner Perry that in all his years of service, which was 19 at that time, he had only taken 10 days off. He never married. He was 58 years old the summer of 1919, a strict but just officer, and in private life, a genial and warm-hearted man. Superintendent Horrigan read the letter with Elizabeth and looked with interest at the photo of Polly and the children. He hadn't realized that Wilson had any children. He got up and opened his office door. Sergeant James Cather was gazing out the window by his window at the sparkling spring day. Come into my office a minute, Sergeant, if you aren't too busy. Sergeant Cather smiled. Of course, sir. The superintendent had his testy moments, but his staff sergeant put them down to his failing health and took no offense. In his office, Horrigan handed him the letter addressed to Polly Wilson. Will you see that Sergeant Wilson gets this mail from Scotland? His wife's family seemed to be quite anxious about Miss Wilson. Sergeant Cather looked at the curiosity at the photograph on Horrigan's desk. That's Wilson's wife, apparently. I didn't know he had any children, did you? Horrigan slid the photo across the desk. No, I had no idea. He looked closely at the picture of Polly and the children. So he's seeing this photo. He's looking at this photo. Closed mouth chap. Good thing, I guess, for a secret agent. Yes, I would say so, sir. I'll arrange to meet him somewhere other than his house as soon as possible. Yes, that's right. We can't break his cover. Tell him I said to get in touch with the family without delay. I'm sure it's just an oversight. The sister-in-law sounds like the worrying kind. Yes, sir, I'll take care of it. And he would too. Horgan was seriously ill and would soon have to ask for a leave of absence. So remember, Horgan is this superintendent here. He's this really hard worker. He's the one who starts this, but he is sick. So he's going to ask for a leave of absence. And this staff sergeant, James Cather, did everything he could to ease his workload. In August 1919, a letter to the commissioner, Horgan described Cather as smart, striking, courteous, and gentlemanly, commented on his strong character and strict probity. He must have been very striking indeed, a blue-eyed, black-haired Irishman well over 6 feet tall and 34 years old that summer of 1919. Superintendent Horgan went on to say, in looking over the past 6 months, I really often wonder how I could have gotten along without his valuable assistance. Sergeant Cather had talents even Superintendent Horgan wasn't aware of. He had at one time worked in the bank, which he subsequently robbed. On a soft July evening, Sergeant Cather set out for his usual brisk walk after supper. He turned toward the English Bay where the sun winked every tiny wave and pacing air filled his lungs. He loved this walk along the sea to Stanley Park. And there around the bend, walking just ahead, was a slim man in plain clothes with a familiar back in white and willowy woman holding his arms. Sergeant Jack Wilson. Sergeant Cather ran up to catch him, and a flustered-looking Wilson introduced him to Mrs. Wilson. A few weeks ago, Sergeant Cather had met Wilson in an out-of-the-way cafe to deliver the mail from Scotland, including the photograph and directive from Horgan to get in touch with the family. Wilson said he couldn't understand why their cable and letters hadn't been received, but he promised to take care of it immediately. Now, Sergeant Cather smiled and took the hand of the slim young woman with sculptured cheekbones. This was definitely not the woman in the photograph. Remember, this is the guy who studied that photograph. How do you do, Sergeant? And how are you enjoying Vancouver, Mrs. Wilson? Oh, it's lovely, isn't it, now that it's stopped raining? Yes, it is indeed. Well, I must get on and leave you to your walk, he said, and strode on ahead like any man out for a serious constitutional. Since Wilson was an undercover, he mustn't linger anyways, nor would it do about face and hurry straight back to report to Horgan. Probably an oversight, Horgan had said, but this was a different woman altogether. And she didn't look old enough to have 2 children, because she's going to be like 21 at this time at best. She's either 20 or 21 here. Some oversight, Sergeant Cather thought when he turned around and walked back the way he'd come, there was no sign of Jack Wilson, and the woman called his wife. The shoreline here smelled fishy. It was not the only thing. So he's kind of noticing that, this is weird. Constable Brickton, which is Wilson's liaison with the office, was often at the Wilson's house on Homer Street in that summer. During the first week of July, he and Wilson were sitting in the veranda talking when Wilson went into the kitchen to get a drink. As he started back, he heard Brickton talking to Jessie in the living room. Oh, Miss Wilson, I must tell you, a strange thing happened in the office today. Oh, said Jessie, what was that? Sergeant Cather showed me a photograph of a strange woman and asked if that was Sergeant Wilson's wife. Brickton laughed. Wilson's heart stopped beating momentarily. Really, Jessie said? Yes, and she didn't look anything like you. I don't know where he got that idea. Wilson drained his glass in a few swallows. When he'd steadied himself and walked back to the veranda, Jessie had gone upstairs. Nothing was ever mentioned about it. So he tells them that, oh yeah, like we were given this photo and this doesn't look anything like you, but we were told this is his wife. What a crazy coincidence. Jessie had been wanting to go home to see her mother, and Jack now encouraged her to go. It would give him some time to think about what he should do. Before she left, he took 3 days off work. He spent every moment with his Jessie, his darling wee girl. Over and over, he asked himself if he should take Jessie and run. Remember, whenever Jack Wilson's in a pickle, he runs. He asked himself if he should take Jessie and run. She would go with him. He knew that. But then he put her on a train to Blaine Lake. On July 31st, Superintendent Horgan wrote to Commissioner Perry with his concerns aroused by Elizabeth's letter and Sergeant Cather's report after meeting Jessie. This aroused my suspicion, and I intended to take the matter up with you during your visit here, but it slipped my memory. While I cannot think that anything serious is the matter, still an investigation is unquestionably necessary. So we are going to see an official investigation by the police. The photograph was that of a middle-aged person with 2 children, whereas the person at present living with Sergeant Wilson is quite young, and it is understood they have only been married a short time. I have not approached Sergeant Wilson on the matter, nor shall I do until I hear from you. It would be most unfortunate if anything should be wrong, as he is the most important witness in our cases against the Russians now being held before the immigration board. So those are those like crazy Russians who get naked and light stuff on fire. In the margin of the letter, he wrote, "Sister states Mrs. Wilson's 30 years of age." So in this photograph, she was 30. Jesse looks 20, and they look very different. While Jesse was away, Wilson got out of the dispatch case he'd used in the military police. The ones Polly's body had fallen over and adhered to that terrible night in the culvert. Sitting at the kitchen table on Homer Street, he went through everything in it. He read his and Jesse's love letters once again, and he looked through the other papers and returned them all, placing the dispatch case once again at the top of the trunk. Conrad Reed, visiting Jack at the house while Jesse was away, had occasion to look in Wilson's desk for something. In the bottom drawer lay a Colt 38 pistol. Reed recognized it as the one that had gone missing from the Saskatoon office a year ago. So he had stolen a police pistol. Thinking he must be mistaken, he looked at it closely, but the butt was chipped in exactly the same place. It was strange Jack never told him he had the gun. He sat at the desk a while thinking about it. There'd be such a commotion in the office about it. All the men questioned that there had been such a commotion in the office about it. All the men questioned one by one. Suspicion cast on Corporal DeVore, who Wilson said had the gun last. Conrad felt vaguely insulted now. He should ask Jack what the devil was going on, but like Jesse, he said nothing. Wilson, expecting to be called in for questioning any day, perhaps even detained, tried to talk to Jesse into staying longer in Blaine Lake. She stayed one extra night, and on August 15th, she stepped off the train into her husband's waiting arms. Then the weeks stretched on with no more word of inquiry, a reprieve Wilson put down to the fact that Superintendent Horrigan had been ill in hospital for some time. Polly's family would not give up. He knew that now, especially Elizabeth. So Wilson gets a break from all this investigation because the guy who's responsible for the investigation is sick. But he knows now that like he needs to do something, right? Like they're going to keep inquiring. He needs to come up with something. He should have just killed her off with the Spanish flu, right? That should have been, he probably would have been better off for it. So why don't we take our break now? We'll read the last two chapters when we come back. So we'll come back. All right, so chapter 29, which is anniversary. In late September, on the anniversary of their last letter from Polly herself, the family renewed their efforts to get some word to her. William Hutchinson couldn't rest, and no one could make him. He paced and fretted his way through the days. In September 18th, Nellie Hutchinson wrote to Miss Wismer asking if there was something she could tell the family about Polly that she had not told Miss Lane, and Elizabeth again took up her pen. And so she sent in this letter to Superintendent Horrigan, who we now know is in the hospital sick and who's going to die soon. I wrote to you on 3rd June enclosing a letter addressed to Mrs. John Wilson, but up to the present time, I have not received an answer from you. We had such hopes on getting Mr. Routledge's letter that they were living in Vancouver, but hope deferred makes the heart sick. It is now 8 months since we received John Wilson's cable saying he and his wife, which is my sister, were leaving for home via the Panama Canal, and neither a line nor word of any kind to say why they have not. So eight months ago, they said, we are leaving to the canal. Oh, sir, can you please put yourself for a moment in my poor parents' place? Perhaps you are a father yourself. If so, think what it would mean to lose all trace of your loved one. My father and mother grieve sorely. Indeed, this awful mystery is killing them slowly but surely. It makes my heart bleed to cry out against the one who is causing them all this worry, for they don't deserve it. For we have the best father and mother in the world, and they were both to John Wilson, many a time I think too good, and so prevented him from realizing his own responsibility. Only this morning I had a letter from my father, and in it he says, we have a very sad home now, and one that used to be oh so happy. Surely God will cause someone to be able to give us news of my girl, and I hope all will yet come right. Mr. Horrigan, dare I ask you to be the one to help them? God knows what I suffer in not knowing what has come over my sister, for she and I were very dear to one another, and the years were seldom separate. Is my brother-in-law on your staff, as Mr. Routledge said? Will you at least answer my letter? Oh, sir, I plead to you for the sake of Mr. and Mrs. Wilson's two little ones who are always inquiring about their mammy to answer this letter and give us what information you have. Indeed, I plead with you for God's sake to do all your power to help us to find them. My husband bids me say he will more than gladly pay any expense you may have to put in inquiring news. Many a time poor father said, oh, if I were able, I would not sit here and wait for news. I would go to Canada and search it all over till I found Polly. Indeed, my husband says if we don't get news soon, he will try and get out himself before he will wait and see father and mother break their hearts. May God help you bring at least peace, if not joy, to my folks. And so Elizabeth has sent that. And so she also sent one to Assistant Commissioner Routledge, another long letter asking for his help. Mr. Routledge, did she and her husband go to Vancouver, or has my brother-in-law gone and left my sister, breaking her heart for him in some corner? Oh, sir, is she dead? It is now 8 months since we received John Wilson's cable. Can you guess the preparations that were made and the children's daily anticipation of their arrival to be followed by this awful silence? Elizabeth did not know that these two men she looked to for help were both seriously ill. Mr. Horgan would soon take an extended leave and travel in Hawaii in an effort to get to well. And Walton Routledge, whose health was failing, even as he took on the added duties of assistant commissioner the previous January, would soon be in a 6 month leave for the same purpose. So basically, both these guys are really ill. They're not in their post. They were the ones who were primarily responsible for this investigation. From this point on, Commissioner Perry himself would reply to Elizabeth's ever more distraught letters. A. Bowen Perry was a brilliant man with an illustrious career. Born in Ontario of United Empire Loyalist stock, he entered the Royal Military College at age 16, where he won the Governor General's gold and silver medals. Appointed inspector at the Northwest Mounted Police at age 22, promoted to superintendent at 25 for services in the Northwest Rebellion. He was made commissioner for the force in 1900 at age 40. Perry was renowned for his prodigious memory of names and faces and for the facts and figures, and also for his keen sense of justice and fairness. So this Perry guy is now the one who's responsible, and it's explicitly stated he's really good. He has a really good memory, which is not going to be good for Jack Wilson, of course. So chapter 30, autumn. It is harvest time on the prairie. In all directions from the culvert, the land is brushed with gold, the tree and brushes ablaze with color. Cubrous machinery lumbers between thick glistening swaths, and field mice scurry for cover as sunburned threshers work late and long in the fragrant fields. Bushes either side of the culvert glow with a deep red flecked with orange. The same wildflowers Polly Wilson admired on her last day on earth soak up the mellow autumn sun, and at night the intense red harvest moon hangs in the sky like a Chinese lantern. And so now we're on chapter 31. This is where we'll end off today. So something very funny. At 138 Cordova Street in Vancouver's pawn shop and secondhand district, Miss Sissons sit behind the counter with her black sweatered arms crossed over her ample bosom. There was hardly room for so large a woman, so hardly room anywhere in the store. Cluttered to the ceiling with the detritus of people moving up or down in life. Business had been slow, and it was almost closing time. It was early October, and the rain was falling for the 5th day in a row as if it never intended to stop. Outside, the dark was already closing in, and rising wind flinging the rain onto the windows in big, wet gusts. Inside, half a wall of clocks ticked endlessly. Miss Simmons was scanning the classifieds in a newspaper on the counter when the bell tinkled. A man wearing a damp blue suit and gray hat threaded his way to the counter, knocking over a scrub board with his elbow, which in turn knocked over several other small items. Mrs. Sissons sighed. Would you be interested in buying a shotgun? He asked when he reached the counter. Sure, I just sold one yesterday. If it's a good condition, of course. You wouldn't believe the junk people bring in here. It's in good condition, all clean with a leather case. You have it here? I'm closing soon. No, I have to go home to get it, but it's not far. I'll be right back. Miss Sissons glanced at the clocks on the wall, all more or less pointing to 4:30. If you hurry, I'll wait. At 5 o'clock, he was back with a good-looking shotgun made in Scotland in a fine old country leather case stamped with the initials JLW, John Wilson. So it's John Wilson shotgun. How much do you want for it? She asked after giving it the once over. It was a double barrel hammerless in nice condition. $25. Not bad. Usually they make you work harder for it. 23, she said. I'll take it, he said. She gave him the book to sign. The last entry on October 4th, 1919. He wrote J. Wilson, or J. Williams, 1539 Robinson Street, and she gave him 2 limp 10s and 3 1s. She walked behind the door and looked locked it behind him. 10 days later, she sold the gun to a Mr. Much for $35. Much, strange name that Miss Sissons thought, if it was his name. The following letter is one of the last official letters written by Superintendent Fitzpatrick Horrigan. This is the guy who's going to Hawaii. His health had deteriorated quickly, and in early November, he obtained a 6-month leave and traveled to Hawaii, where he hoped to recover his health. This letter would be would have been written before Elizabeth's letter, written in late September, which arrived in Vancouver. These letters take time to get places. So this is October 10th, 1919. And it's about Sergeant Wilson. I have the honor to report that I am now through with the above named NCO, which is John. We have only 3 Russian cases remaining, and he has no evidence to tender in any of them. So the reason that this has been going on for so long is because they need him to present his evidence. He's the key witness. His work during the past months has not been very satisfactory to me, especially since I have been unwell and unable to follow up closely as I would have liked. I have no direct charge to place against Sergeant Wilson, but many of his actions did not appear good to me. As he is uncovered now, of course, his further work here would be useless. I did think of sending him to the Prince Rupert district, but I have rather lost confidence in him. Hence, I should be very pleased if you were to wire me to transfer him to some other division. The commission's coded reply was succinct. Your letter 10th, send Sergeant Wilson to Regina for instructions. So John is officially being told he has to go to Regina. In preparation, the Wilsons moved out of Homer Street House and into the City Hotel. Jack knew he had real reason to worry now, but still he said nothing to Jesse. On October 21st, Inspector Henry Newson notified Commissioner Perry that Sergeant Wilson had been recalled by the Immigration Board to give evidence. They would advise the commissioner of Wilson's departure in a day or 2. These trials, often referred to as the Russian trials, may have been the Doukhobor trials, but they were more likely trials of radical extremists who were advocating the declaration of general strikes. The West was seething with labor troubles, with dissidents relying on disaffected foreign elements in the population for support. Waterfront hostilities were commonplace. Wilson gained confidence of stevedoers by drinking with them and keeping his ear open for trouble that might be brewing. His testimony given, Wilson was ordered to depart immediately for Regina, and he and Jesse left on a late train on October 23rd. Oops. So on October 24th, we get a letter from Regina. It's from the police here. So, have you photographs of Mrs. Wilson sent by Craig? If so, forward here. Advised by wire if the woman living with Wilson accompanies him when he leaves for Regina. The coded reply arrived on the commissioner's desk the same morning, signed by Inspector Newson, who it appears came from Victoria to replace Superintendent Horrigan while he was away, while he was on leave. Newson joined the Royal Northwest Mounted Police by 1906. By 1910, at the age of 30, he had risen to the rank of inspector and soon was responsible for visiting all the divisional posts in Alberta and Saskatchewan and establishing a fingerprint system for the Royal Northwest Police guard rooms. At 6'3" he had a commanding presence. So we see another letter. Wilson left on number 8 on the 23rd stop. The party referred to your code telegram of today. Left hotel with him, stop. Photograph in his possession, stop. Refer you to letter of 31st July. So these are telegrams, right? So letters take a long time to go. Telegrams, however, are basically instant. So they're sending these telegrams to give more accurate times, which is why it's not being written in proper English, right? It takes has anyone ever tried one like Morse code? It takes a long time to actually do it. So that's why it's shorthand. Even as they traveled west, Jack still thought about running. Remember, Jack always runs. At any point along the route, they could get off the train. There would be nothing to stop them, but where would they go? He had no money to speak of. The money from the old country had dried up long ago, and there were no MSA fines to turn to his advantage. They'd catch up with him before long, and he hated to drag Jessie into it. At least in Saskatchewan, she had her family to go to when it broke, and that was inevitable now. And something in him had always known he would see the whole thing through. Jack and Jesse arrived in Regina and checked in the Grand Hotel. Jack presented himself at headquarters and was told his posting wasn't decided yet, then appreciate if he would stay in Regina until they needed him sometime in the next few days. Shortly after his arrival, he was recalled by the immigration board to give further evidence at one of the Russian trials. He left for Vancouver, leaving Jesse behind in the Grand Hotel. So, and that is where things end here. So we're gonna do our final plot summary. The rest of the day will just be spent time with, we have a bunch of questions and stuff up here. It'll just be some time to work on that stuff. So just on page 22, this one's gonna be a little cramped. It is gonna be a little bit cramped, so you'll have to write a little small here. Okay. Come on. So starting off here, what we have. So we get this is a whole bunch of letters that are happening here, right? So we're getting a whole bunch of letters. So we get Routledge. This is that guy from PA. So he gets a letter from Elizabeth asking about Polly. And so what does he say? He says that Wilson is or he replies saying Wilson is with his wife in Vancouver. And so what does Elizabeth do with this information? Elizabeth then writes to that Torian guy who's in Vancouver with a photo. A whole bunch of things happen, but ultimately, a whole bunch of things happen. We get all these different cops that come in, spec stuff, but ultimately what ends up happening with this stuff is that gives the letter and photo to John. John eventually ends up getting this information like, hey, these guys are curious. They want to know from Polly. Can you please talk to them? So this is when John knows that, oh crap, they're digging. So an investigation starts. But Horrigan is sick and Jack had stolen a pistol. Oh, sorry. Sorry, not just Horrigan. Routledge is also sick. So both these guys who have been helping her are sick. They're both out of commission now. And so we get Perry, who takes on the case. And remember, Perry's that really smart guy with a good memory. So now we end up getting that autumn chapter, and then it leads into this thing here, which is basically John's shotgun gets sold to a pawn store. So his shotgun gets sold to a pawn store. And the investigation on John continues, but they hold off in this investigation because the investigation, we'll say frankly, it pauses until John completes Rushton testimony. Right, he has to testify against to the immigration board. He was this undercover cop. He's the key witness. They're holding off on some of this stuff because they want to get this through. So they wait until he completes it. And generally speaking, once he does it, he does most of his job. He's going to sends Wilson plus Jesse to Regina. And then Wilson goes back to Vancouver. He gets told you have to go back to Vancouver. You still have some more testifying to do. And so once you finish up with this, you have some time to try out these questions up above. But also, remember, there are still some assignments that are due. There's that timeline assignment that's due. And so if you guys look in the back of the room, the side of the computer tray, I have some like bristle board there. So if you want to do like a paper one, I have that. If you're doing a digital one, that's okay too. But there is that timeline that's not due until Tuesday, but you still want to make sure you get that done. We might even end up finishing the book this week. We'll see. So the rest of the day is just time to work on this booklet. The rest of the morning is time to work on this booklet and work on your assignments.